We have, okay, very good. Well, good afternoon. Well, good morning, I should say, here on the East Coast of the US. This is Elton Brewington with Brightside Global Trade TV, and I have the good pleasure of speaking with a global author, Mr. David Rundell, and he's written the book Vision or Mirage, Saudi Arabia at the Crossroads. What an amazing perspective, David. Thank you for writing the book first, and also for allowing Brightside to share in your book writing, and as well as helping us understand more and more about the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia and the rest of the world. And you've opened a unique book of exploration. So please take the floor, tell us who you are and the author and the reason for you writing the book.
Good morning. I am David Rundell, and I spent 30 years as an American diplomat, most of that time in the Middle East and most of that time in Saudi Arabia. I was, in the end, I became sort of the United States government's go-to guy and expert on Saudi Arabia. There were a number of reasons for that, but basically I spent the 15 years in the kingdom doing every job really that there was.
David?
States, which is to say buying and selling things.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was the deputy head of the embassy and later on the chief of mission. So I had a unique set of experiences. Nobody has done all of those jobs in one country except me, not just in Saudi Arabia, but in any country. Mm-hmm. So I had a unique career. And this was interesting because Saudi Arabia is a difficult country to understand, and one which is poorly understood for many reasons, and we can go into that, why it's poorly understood. But when I retired and became a consultant, a number of people who I respected advised that, really encouraged and said, you know, you have a unique perspective on Saudi Arabia. Nobody else has done all the things that you did there. And over a period of a long time, because when I first started was 1980, and when I finished was, you know, a few years ago. So it was almost 35 years that I was involved in the kingdom, and I still go there regularly. So, so they said, you have a responsibility not to let everything that you learned and figured out disappear. Mm-hmm. I took that. At first I said, well, you know, I'm not really interested in writing a book. But after a while, I thought, you know, that they have a point. So I did attempt to write a book. Now, when I first wrote the book, it was something of an encyclopedia, really just for my colleagues in the embassy. And then actually, I said that to the publisher. I said, you know, if only one person reads this book, and that's the American ambassador to Saudi Arabia, that's okay with me. And they said, well, that's okay with you, but we would like to sell more than one book.
Right.
And so, so I said, all right. So we didn't dumb it down, but we shortened it considerably. And in fact, they were right. It made it a better book. It made it a more condensed book. It made it a more focused book. And I think it made it a more accessible book to the average educated, interested, and intelligent reader. So it is now, I think, fair to say that it is the best guide to understanding how Saudi Arabia works and has changed that is available. It's not, and it falls in between being a PhD thesis, of which I have read many. You know, if you want to read about techniques of growing dates in 18th century Mecca, you know, you can find somebody who wrote a book on that, but you probably will fall asleep after the first chapter. On the other hand, you can read some more sensationalist, well, not sensationalist, that's sort of a colored word, generalist topics on general books on just the history or just one particular individual. And those are interesting books. They're general books, and many of them are very well written, but they don't really give you an overall sense of how the place works and has historically evolved. So if that's what you're looking for, this book is probably unique in the sense that it really does see that. And I will just make one last comment here, is that the main point for your listeners to take away from this is that Saudi Arabia is changing very fast. Very fast. And in significant ways. And if you want to understand those changes, to some extent, you have to understand what existed before. You have to understand how things used to work and how they're working now. If you're going to navigate Saudi Arabia for whatever purpose, whether it's political, economic, whatever reason you want to go there or learn about it, you need to understand that. So in those sense, I'm actually very pleased. I think the book succeeded in what it was attempting to do. So that's
amazing
of the book.
That's amazing in its own right. I mean, you cover a depth or a fluid territory of areas. Now, I've just isolated a couple of them out. I hope it's not too aggressive to assume that we might be able to harness information that's relevant from you around a couple of different territorial areas. A couple that I really want and must get in, of course, we have to discover the aspects of trade and oil, primarily, just so that we know how it's changing and what do you see for the future of that change. And then we want to deal with the politics of the region and its change. What does that mean from more democratic to less democratic and that kind of thing. And also I want to deal with business, trade, and cultivation of business, real business, economic, banking business, those kind of things. And I like to have a perspective of relevance as it relates to some of the other Middle East territories that seem to be up and coming, Dubai primarily. And it's just amazing how they've just strapped on to the economic engine of things and really tried to step forward. And then I'd like to get a better understanding about education, medical education, and where that's going, and some elements of history itself. I hope it's not too aggressive. No,
that's fine. That's fine. And I think you probably also want to talk a little bit about religion and human rights and women's rights and things like that, which are usually they're on people's minds. I want to just
brushstroke those territories because those are sensitive areas. And we want to, we're part of what can help Saudi Arabia shift and change to more of an economic destination. I mean, because of course, I don't even know what is the currency in Saudi Arabia. Is that the dirham?
No, it's called the rial.
Rial, yeah, right. That's right. That's right.
It's fixed to the dollar.
Okay,
and what's the dollar?
What's the currency?
Pegged to the dollar.
What's the? Oh, it's consistent with the dollar. 1 to 1.
It's pegged to the dollar. It hasn't. It's whatever it is, like it's 0.37, I think 0.38.
Oh, that's not bad.
I used to know off the top of my head, but it's been that way for 40 years.
Is that right? You know,
they keep it that way. It's pegged. Yeah, it's pegged.
One destination.
And that's part. There's many reasons for that, but mainly because they buy and sell oil in dollars.
Okay. Oh, that's right. That's right. So to keep the consistency of the trade between the U.S. and the Saudi in order, make the currency rate similar. Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So, I mean, it's so amazing. There are countries around the world that have a consistent trade rate with the dollar. Primarily, believe it or not, Bermuda. Bermuda is equal to the dollar, equal to the US dollar. I don't know, small island like that, 21 square miles, and they're equal to the dollar. I don't even know, we won't get into that. But so I want to kick this off with a fluid, and we started with the money, which is great. Get that out the way. Now, the Saudi Arabia holds in assets, I must be at least 300 to 500 trillion of dollars. I don't know. Do you know? You happen to know?
The foreign currency reserves of Saudi Arabia, they're right now about about $500 billion.
Okay.
Give or take a little bit. Okay. I mean, it changes. It was 600, and then it went down because of COVID. They had to spend a lot of money So exactly what it is today, I'm not sure
Right,
100%
right.
what it is exactly today, but it's about half a trillion dollars, which is a
Okay.
lot. Okay.
It is a lot.
That what you need to understand. This is getting rather technical. I don't want to get too
Okay,
want to
okay.
bore your friends, but so banks look at debt to GDP ratio to see
Sure.
how a country's doing. We're not doing very well. We've got over 100% compared to
Yeah.
our GDP.
Right,
The
right.
Saudis were a classic case of a well-managed economy in the sense that basically between 1980 and 2000, people don't realize, people forget about this, but the oil price was not high. The Saudis were not getting rich for 20 years. They were running a big deficit. For over 20 years, they ran a big deficit. And they got to the point where they were really running out of money. They got to the point where they were getting close to 100% debt to GDP ratio. They had gone through all their reserves. And then around 2000, oil prices started picking up, largely because of expansive demand in China. And the Saudi king, who was at the time was Abdullah, started getting all this money. And rather than spend it, which a lot of people were screaming, spend the money, spend the money. He said, no, we're going to pay off all our debts.
Wow.
So he paid off all the debts. And then they said, okay, start spending the money. And he said, no, now I'm going to build up a big reserve.
Okay.
And he did that. And it was, it would be hard to do that to some extent in a democracy where everybody could scream at you, but he's a king, so he could do what he wanted. So he said, you know what, this is what we're going to do. We're going to be prudent stewards here. And so they got their debt to GDP down to like 3%.
Oh,
it was essentially non-existent.
That's
In fact, the banks were, in America, banks buy government bonds, which are essentially debt. And which are debt. And so the banks were screaming that he wasn't issuing any bonds anymore. He wasn't issuing any government debt because he didn't have any debt.
Right.
So anyways, people eventually decided, okay, look, this is a little bit too much. We should have some debt. And so they made a target. I think it's like 30%. They actually, when COVID came, they went a little bit above that, but they still have very little debt. They still have a lot of reserves, and they maintain the peg on their currency quite robustly. There have been times in the past when people bet against the real, thought that the peg would break. And I can tell you all those people lost a lot of money.
I bet.
And I advised them a number of these hedge funds not to bet against the real, and they all said, you know what, we don't believe you. We have all these numbers here. The Saudis can't maintain the peg. I said, well, you'll be surprised.
Be my guest. Do your thing.
Be my guest. And so in any event, some of them lost a lot of money. The ones that listened, they didn't make a lot of money. They just didn't lose a lot of money by not taking the bet. And the Saudi banks, who were the counterparty to these transactions, were just laughing. They just looked at it like, this is free money. If these people want to bet against us, good luck.
Good luck.
Anyway, that's another story for another day. But what I thought I would tell you about initially, I would talk a little bit about the political changes in Saudi Arabia.
Sure, please.
And I will be brief. But basically, Saudi Arabia is a relatively new nation. It's about 100 years old. It was knit together by a man called Ibn Saud, who basically through diplomacy and through marriage and through military conquest over a period of about 30 years, unified several distinctly different regions and numerous distinctly different tribes. And he created and imposed a central government. He did this initially with the help of the British.
That's Ibn Saud. Ibn
Ibn
Saud.
Saud. Ibn Saud was his name. He
Mhm,
died in 1953.
mhm,
He's a very colorful character.
mhm.
And we could talk a lot about him and his skill really in what he did, because what he did is take a place that is like Afghanistan.
Mhm, mhm,
Today, Afghanistan is every 20 miles, you got a different tribe, you got a different warlord, you got a different chief.
mhm, mhm.
Uh, and he defeated and unified all those different people. There's no unified government really in Kabul. I mean, the government of Afghanistan runs Kabul, and maybe 10 miles outside the city, and that's about it.
Unlike Saudi.
The same thing is the case in Yemen. Okay,
Mhm,
Yemen is not a country. Yemen is
mhm.
a whole collection of different tribes and different
Really?
warlords, and yeah, there really is no.
Mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
even before the civil war that they have now, there was no real control in of an effective central government. So
Okay.
this guy unified the country,
Oh,
and he was lucky, and he was smart, and he had
okay.
help. There's many reasons why he did it, that you can read those in the book if you're interested. But
Okay.
any event, when he died, he did something else which was clever. Most Saudi or most Middle East countries have a very unstable mechanism for transferring political power. They
Okay.
often have revolutions or coups or assassinations or some,
Mhm.
and it's not a very smooth transition often. He figured out a system where he had about, when he died, he had about 34 sons left.
Okay.
He had
34.
more, but some of them died.
Okay.
And so he made a system where the kingship would go from brother to brother to brother.
Oh, okay.
So rather than them fighting, rather than having father to son to son to son,
Right.
he made the brothers. So this
Okay.
was a smart idea in the sense that it gave a lot of people a stake in the game.
Ah, ah.
And so all these brothers ran the country as a kind of a committee, you might say. Now, the king was always, at the end of the day, he was first among equal, and they would do what the king said. But he consulted all these guys,
Okay.
and many of these guys had his brothers, or in many cases, really his half brothers,
Uh-huh.
because they had different mothers.
Right. Right.
Um, he would, many of those people had very important jobs in the government, which they had for 20 or 30 years.
Sure,
And
sure,
in
sure.
fact, there were really three different armies.
Okay.
And so, no, it was, in a sense, it was kind of like what we have in America with division of power, different branches of the government. So nobody can get too powerful.
Mhm.
So there was the Army, the National Guard, and the Ministry of Interior, and they were each run by a separate prince.
Sure.
And so this, likewise, every different ministry, there were many ministries run by princes. They were not all run by princes, many,
Right.
but many of them had their own sort of independent agendas, and
Sure.
they would have a plan, but these guys would all go and do pretty much what they wanted in many cases.
Right. So.
Um,
Mhm.
so now this has changed. Okay,
Okay.
so this
Okay.
is what's important to understand. So that's how it used to work.
Uh-huh.
Now, how's it going to work now? Well, people say, oh, King Salman, he destroyed the system that his father put in place,
Okay.
because now he put his son in charge, not one of
Oh,
his
so now
daughters.
it didn't go from brother to brother. It went from king to son.
Yeah, but so people say, how come he did that? He's wrecking the system.
Right.
Well, actually, he didn't wreck the system. The system ended itself because they ran out of brothers.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
That's true.
so
That's
it's
true.
like they all died. So
Right.
there's
Right.
none
Right.
left.
So
He's
there's
like
none left.
exactly. So I mean, it worked for it. The system worked since 1953. This
Mhm.
guy had his first son in 1900. Ibn Saud had his first child in 1902, and he
Okay.
had his last son in 1948.
Okay.
So
Okay.
he was a busy guy for
Right.
many
Right.
years. So
Okay.
the age difference of his sons was very big.
Okay.
And so, but even now, they're running out of sons.
Yeah. Well, they should
Really
have.
only, there's really only one left who's still other than the king who is physically able to be a king. Yeah, there's some that are still alive, but they're like, you know, 90
have
years
they
old and
prompted the next
they're in
step?
a wheelchair. So they couldn't become king. So he has to figure out, what am I going to do here? How am I going to keep this this show on the road? And the problem he's got now is, wow, we had 34 brothers. Okay, we could all sit in one room and we could talk and we could kind of make a deal, and we were all at least half brothers. Some of us were real brothers.
Sure.
But now I got 500 cousins.
Right.
And guess what? Every one of them thinks he should be king. And every one of them thinks, you know, I'm as smart as my other cousin. They should make me king.
Yeah.
So he was looking at a real problem there, because these people were all going to start fighting amongst each other.
That's true.
And that is usually what happens in most of these Arab dynasties. The brothers are okay, but the cousins, when you get to the grandsons, they start fighting amongst each other and fall apart.
And there's no rule of leadership.
So what this guy did is basically he looked around and he said, who do I think is going to do a good job?
Okay.
And he picked Mohammed bin Salman.
Okay.
And
based on, was there any criteria, or he just liked his style?
He thought that he was smart and aggressive.
Okay.
And determined.
Okay.
And a bit ruthless.
Okay.
And all of those things he figured you needed. And there were other people who were smart, and there were other people who, there were many people, let's be clear. There were a lot of people who thought they were more qualified than this young prince, because he was younger and age had been an important factor. But he pushed aside a number of people, including older brothers of Mohammed bin Salman.
Oh, wow.
Which really shocked them. But he said, look, this is the guy who can do it. And basically, I think he was right. Yeah. Because this guy has now consolidated power, so that there's not, when the father finally passes away, there's not going to be a Game of Thrones.
Okay.
You all saw that TV show, so you know what happens.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's not going to be a Game of Thrones. There's one guy, he's in charge, he's going to run the show, and that will provide stability, which is important, especially if you're a businessman thinking about investing. You want political stability.
But you make the point here, a businessman looking to invest. I think it's important. Now, this is going to be amazing, David, in that there's a wealth of factors and information. Now, we are appealing to a business audience. So what will be the attractive markers for a U.S. review to consider investing in Saudi Arabia, and consequently, back and forth, looking for Saudis to look at and invest in the U.S.?
Well, as I said a little bit, King Abdullah was kind of lucky in that when he became king, the oil price started going up.
Okay.
And so, as I said, he saved his money and paid off his debts, and then he had the money to spend, and it was a happy time. Oil price was $120 for a while. King Salman was not so lucky. When he took over, oil prices were crashing. And he thought, I'm going to go broke again. I got this big reserve that my brother gave me, but that's not going to last forever. So I need a plan to fix the economy. And there were several quite obvious problems with the economy, which people had known about for a long time, but nobody had ever really done anything. And that is, they need to diversify the economy away from total dependence on oil for economic growth and for government revenues.
Okay.
They need to create jobs for Saudis. They need to bring women into the workforce. They need to reduce their dependence on foreign labor, educate their own population more. So there's a fairly clear list of things they needed to do. They needed to balance the budget, they needed to diversify the economy, and they needed to create jobs. Those are the three main things they needed to do.
Big deal.
And in order to do that, they came up with, they had a whole lot of plans before, which I think this is actually the 10th 5-year plan. But most of these plans, there's some minister of planning wrote it. He used some government agencies from foreign governments or from the Ford Foundation or the Rockefeller Foundation or you know, USAID or somebody like that help them. And then they just put the thing in their drawer and they never did anything. They didn't do much. This guy, knew Mohammed bin Salman, he went and hired private sector consultants. And he paid them a lot of money. And he hired the Boston consulting groups and the Bains and the McKinseys, and the Oliver Wymans and the Deloittes and all of these guys to come up with different plans. And quite remarkably, sometimes he would pay 2 consultants. You know, consultants usually bid on projects. Sometimes he would have 2 or 3 bid, and then he would sit there and say, you know what? I like all of your plans, all 3 of you. I'll pay all 3 of you. Go do it and tell me what your plan is. So he got a lot of good plans. And now he's starting to put those into practice, and they are beginning to have an effect. And I'll just tell you some of the things that he did that people had never done before. He started making taxes on the Saudi people. Which they never had any taxes before. And he said, well, you know what? We're starting today. We're going to have sales tax, basically. Then he said, you know what? Basically, I've been giving you water, electricity, and gasoline. Gasoline was like 25 cents a gallon. You know, it's been a long time since it cost that in America. And he said, you know what? Like, this is stopping. We're going to start making people pay a real price. People didn't like that. You know, they said, well, you know,
wow, we've gotten this free.
But he said, look, we got to, you know, this is the free lunch has got to stop. You got to start working and going to work. Then he started making it for women to work. I'll talk about that in a couple minutes, but he started basically having an affirmative action program for women to get women into the labor force. He began to abolish many of the restrictions that had been on women. And he began to make it more expensive to hire foreign labor. So people would give jobs to Saudis. And he began to tell the Saudi people that everybody can't. Saudi Arabia is an unusual country, okay, in the sense that most Saudis work for the government.
Well, most Saudis are employed by the government itself.
Yes, and most private sector jobs are done by people who are from another country.
Sure.
So he said, look, this can't go on forever. So I'm not going to hire any more government workers, and I'm going to send these foreign workers home. And if you want a job, you're going to need to get a job in the private sector. So you're starting to see things that you never saw before. I mean, you would never see a Saudi as a cashier at a grocery store.
Really?
No.
Really?
It'd be a Pakistani or a Filipino or somebody. Not now. Now it's changing. Now you see Saudis, including Saudi women. So he has begun to really, if you will, normalize the economy. Now, he had some problems because, well, number one, because this is not easy to do. And number two,
it's a cultural shift.
COVID came along. So COVID, you know, that didn't help things. That made the whole economy, everybody's economy got shut down for a while. So he fell behind on some of his goals, but he's catching up now, and they are well on their way to balancing the budget, and they are never going to wean themselves completely off oil.
Right.
They have such a competitive advantage in
Sure.
oil that they're always going to be selling
Oh, yeah.
oil. But what they
First
need to
in, last
do,
out. Uh-huh.
what they need to do is diversify enough to make their welfare state a bit more sustainable.
Okay, okay.
And they're
okay.
doing that in a number
Okay.
of ways. Number one, they trying to expand their tourism industry, by
Okay.
which they really mean religious tourism,
Sure, I
because
see.
this
I
is
see.
people going to Mecca.
Right,
Okay.
that's right.
And there's,
Uh-huh.
some people have Las Vegas and millions of people go to Las Vegas. These guys have Mecca and millions of people want to go to Mecca.
Come to Mecca.
And there's only
They
one
have to go to
Mecca.
Mecca. They have to go to
Exactly.
Mecca. That's part of their heart.
They have a monopoly. They have a
Right.
natural monopoly. They're the only guys who have Mecca. And so
Sure.
if you're a Muslim and you want to go to the pilgrimage, you got to go there. So
I mean,
they're making a big deal.
I think that the Quran states that every Muslim, every good Muslim must make their Mecca once in their lifetime, So that's a pledge that they come back to the home state. So that's important. This covers a myriad of territorial areas for the state of Saudi Arabia to grow. What is the largest city is Riyadh or?
The largest city today is Riyadh, followed by Jeddah. Probably after that is Dhahran, which is the oil capital.
Okay.
So they have anyway. So they're doing mining. They're doing healthcare. They're trying to do IT. They're trying to do some manufacturing, and these things take time.
Sure.
The biggest success they've had
tell you what, David. Let's, if you don't mind, let's take a 15-minute, break for station ID, and we'll come back and we'll start again with a new perspective. Is that okay?
That's fine. That's fine. Whatever works for you.
Right. Brightside Global Trade TV, Elton Brewington with David Rumsdell. Rundell. Yeah. And so we'll come back in just a few minutes with follow-up. Thank you. All
okay.
Right.
Bye-bye.